The Amazon of Diablo 2. Warriors of the Scovos Isles, vast, beautiful islands south of Conduras. Master spear fighters and archers, the Amazons have long wandered the south tip of the continent, commanding vast armies of warriors, fending the world from great evil. With Diablo 2 Resurrected coming out, hopefully sometime this year, now is the time to show off the visual changes and welcome players to a classic game, both old and new alike. So join me, Tails for Game Lore Dash, as I break down the various skills of the Amazon in Diablo 2 Resurrected.
Not even death can save you from me.
Bow and crossbow skills. Our opening salvo consists of the bow and crossbow skills line. Despite being portrayed with the aesthetic of spear and shield, the Amazons, like their rogue sisters, excel in the use of bows and crossbows. Excellent for range supremacy, the skills here make for a seriously awesome time, starting with Magic Arrow, a skill that fires an arrow comprised purely of magical force, which deals physical and magical damage for overcoming physical resistances and immunities at a decreasing mana cost and an increased attack rate. This ability consumes no ammunition, so it's great for taking out enemies at no cost to your arrow and bolt stores, but cannot be used in tandem with other abilities. Fire Arrow. Though this ability consumes ammunition, unlike Magic Arrow, it also adds fire damage on top of dealing a percentage of total damage in magic fire, once again allowing the arrow to overcome physical resistances. Cold Arrow. Another in the elemental arrow line that deals added cold damage as well as separating a percentage of physical damage to cold damage to overcome physical resistance and immunity. Like other cold spells and abilities, Cold Arrow chills targets, which, as the term implies, slows targets both in movement and attack speed. Multiple Shot. At the cost of a single arrow, Multiple Shot fires a barrage of arrows in a spread with 21 arrows firing at once at level 20. Given the spread is too far to really be effective against one target, the strength of this ability is in affecting multiple targets, and you can control the spread by aiming closer for wider spreads and further away for a much tighter cluster. And all at 3/4 of your overall weapon damage. Exploding Arrow. Instead of firing multiple arrows to affect multiple targets, fire a single arrow with increased attack rating that ends in an explosive payload affecting multiple targets with added fire damage. This is where the arrows that divide physical damage into elemental damage end in exchange for added effects, in this case, fire splash damage. Ice Arrow. While this ability doesn't add any additional cold damage from physical damage, instead just adding a greater boost of cold damage, this ability also freezes instead of chills. However, as most super uniques can't be frozen, and freeze times in Nightmare and Hell are largely reduced, this ability is actually inferior to its predecessor. Guided Arrow. Probably one of the more amusing abilities in this line, guided arrows seek out their targets regardless of where they move to. This ability can still be blocked, but it bypasses defenses and is probably the best skill to kill higher defense enemies. This ability used to function with piercing prior to version 1.09, but as this was a bug, it no longer functions. Immolation Arrow. Same as Ice Arrow, this ability doesn't split physical damage to magic, and also carries with it an increased casting delay in exchange for dealing increased fire damage, and unleashes a small firewall at the impact point, which deals additional fire damage for 3 seconds. Which is great for small, tight corridors, like, well, you know, Strafe. Just like Multiple Shot, Strafe deals reduced damage in quick succession, though instead of in a widespread arc, this fires arrows wherever you point them in a quick-fire, machine gun manner, and fires even faster when in conjunction with increased attack speed. However, unlike Strafe in Diablo 3, where the Demon Hunter moves in tandem with firing their arrows, the Amazon in Diablo 2 is rooted until all of her arrows are fired from that particular volley. Freezing Arrow. Freezing Arrow adds an explosive freezing blast to any arrow or bolt, adding splash damage and freezing all nearby targets. This cold damage is added to the damage of the shot and doesn't delineate from physical damage, which is far less effective at higher difficulties and freezing times are seriously reduced, making this ability arguably less effective than even Cold Arrow. But if you have charms and gear that adds chill and freezing effects to attacks, this ability can still remain semi-useful. And since it synergizes with Cold Arrow, worth putting a few points into. Spear and Javelin skills. The picturesque weapon of the Amazon, the Spear and Javelin. Whether for use in hunting or warfare, the Amazons work tirelessly to perfect techniques with these long-reach weapons to devastating, and sometimes, supernatural ends. Jab. The first ability allotted to the Amazon, Jab hits a single enemy rapidly, 3 times, starting at a lower damage amount, but increasing by level 7, at a constantly increased attack rating. However, the end damage is usually too low to be any more functional than a basic ability at early levels, and has no synergy benefit to any ability later on. I typically put 1 point in it at level 2, then hold all remaining points until I start building up Power Strike, Lightning Bolt, and the like. Power Strike. Strike the enemy with the wrath of Zera, bride of Hephaestus, goddess of vengeance and storms. Power Strike deals a massive amount of lightning damage to a single target with a boost to attack rating as well. This ability makes short work of any boss early on, including act bosses, unless it's Duriel, and then you have a lot more to get through before you can actually deal much damage. Poison Javelin. Charge a thrown javelin with poison, dealing high amounts of poison damage to the enemy and leaving behind a cloud of poison in a line affecting any enemy who crosses that path. Impale. This ability deals huge amounts of damage with greatly increased attack rating, but is very slow, can be interrupted, and causes large percentages of durability loss to the equipped weapon, so use this ability sparingly to avoid frequent visits to the blacksmith. Lightning Bolt. Turn a javelin into a blazing bolt of electric damage that rips through enemies, dealing a high-end amount of damage with a severe low-end differential, dealing as low as 1 point of damage, but converts all physical damage dealt by the javelin in addition to adding lightning damage for overcoming physical immunity. Charged Strike. Just like Power Strike, but with the added benefit of sending out charged bolts, which, like the Sorceress's version, deal high damage across multiple bolts, which are either released across a group or large targets, which will take huge amounts of damage from being blasted by multiple bolts per hit. Plague Javelin. Just like Poison Javelin, only dealing increased poison damage and creates a huge cloud of poison gas on successful hits, damaging any creature that passes through. However, like any poison damage ability, it takes a while to deal its complete damage and isn't sufficient for quick kills. Fend. Similar to the Paladin's Zeal, hit multiple enemies in a close area around you at a highly increased rate of attack damage and attack rating. Great when in close quarters with multiple targets, and like Jab and Impale, relies heavily on Javelin and Spear damage and base damage bonuses from stats and gear. Lightning Strike. Adding on to the list of lightning abilities, which take up more than 2/3 of this list, comes Lightning Strike, a powerful melee attack that sends bolts of chain lightning through waves of enemies that even bounce back and forth, dealing damage over and over again. Highly effective versus groups, not so much versus single targets, which would show a preference to Charge Strike. Lightning Fury. The absolute most potent ability, arguably in the entire game. Hurl a javelin charged with lightning that fires multiple bolts of lightning at every single monster in range when the javelin strikes. This is the ability that gives the Amazon the title Queen of Clear, when built into the Lightning Javison aspect, and rightly so. Magic and passive skills. But it's not enough that the Amazon has awesome abilities simply keyed to her physical weaponry, so to complement her incredible abilities, she also has an array of personal buffs and debuffs designed to spin the fight completely in her favor. Inner Sight. From a point focused on the Amazon, reach out with a wave debuff that lowers the defense of every target affected, making it drastically easier for the Amazon to damage enemies, which, while an ability that is cast by the rogue mercenaries of Act 1, it's not as beneficial as the aura provided by an Act 2 mercenary. Critical Strike. Arguably one of the most critical skills of any build that acts in concordance with physical damage, doubling all damage dealt from any weapon starting at 16% and increasing per level. This damage applies to physical only and not to elemental damage from various skills. However, recall that many abilities transfer some or all elemental damage from physical damage, so keep this in mind when building your Amazon. Dodge. Any melee Amazon build prizes this ability almost as much as Critical Strike, dodging melee attacks while standing still or attacking, with most builds putting no less than 12 points in it, and of course, the higher the better. There is a specific dodge animation, but it only shows when doing absolutely nothing. Slow missiles. Much like Inner Sight, slow missiles acts like a curse to all targets in range for an increasing duration that slows the speed of incoming missiles firing after the spell is cast, not those that are coming in during the casting time or before. Avoid. Just like dodge, only avoid gains benefit versus ranged attackers. However, it's arguably less useful than its successor ability evade, as most range damage comes in when you're moving around and can even be mitigated with abilities like decoy and slow missiles. Penetrate. In most melee Amazon builds, strength is often traded for dexterity to rail heaviest for increased melee damage, which often leads to a lower dexterity and therefore attack rating. Penetrate acts like Critical Strike, but passively boosts attack rating, which can make up for this. Decoy. Create a perfect shadow clone of the Amazon, drawing ire from all who see it, and thus freeing her up to deal her damage unmolested. Evade. Just like dodge and avoid, only this ability functions while walking or running, whereas its predecessors act while attacking or standing still, which again makes her harder to hit and therefore less susceptible to damage from higher end enemies and even bosses. Valkyrie. Summon a magical meat shield that, while dealing very little damage, takes the damage away from the Amazon like Decoy, while dealing damage in return by contrast. They regenerate their own health and benefit from dodge, avoid, and evade, same as the Amazon. They also appear with random gear gaining various magical benefits like triggering spells on hit or debuffing targets. I reiterate, a powerful ally in combat. Pierce. A key ability for any Amazon focused on ranged weaponry, whether bows, crossbows, or javelins. In the case even of supremely powerful abilities like Lightning Fury, the lightning bolts emanating from the resulting impact of the initial javelin strike shares the ability to pierce, affecting even more targets than even the initial damage they were already going to get from the first salvo of bolts. Thoughts. Do not sleep on the Amazon. I made this mistake when I first started playing Diablo 2 back when it first came out, but the Olympian warrior aspect didn't really appeal to me, though the bone-armored old man did. Says a lot, right? The Amazon is a pure damage slaughterhouse, rivaling even the melee brute that is the barbarian or the paladin, who clears some of the hardest areas at higher difficulties with ease. And no matter your opinion on the design in Diablo 2 Resurrected, which I have commented on in other videos, slap a full helmet on her and tear the demons of Sanctuary to shreds, because I guarantee, no matter how she looks in the final release, the power she holds is way more worthwhile to spending time playing her. Are you ready to play the Amazon? I made one in the technical alpha, had a blast, and you will too. Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in Diablo 2 Resurrected.